Hi guys, welcome to DCP Webinar. This is the fifth in a row after we have done 4 already on the last 4 weekends. This is Yogesh Chavan, DCP mentor. I'll be taking you to the era, the pre-digital era of photography, where the system that we use now, there's the DSLR or the digital single lens reflector camera was not used. So here I share my experience with you when I did photography during those days. And thank you DCP for giving me this opportunity. Here is a view of a couple of cameras. This was of course way back in 1920s, 1930s, when even I was not there. But just to give you an idea before we come to the era where I did photography, that is during the 1970s and 1980s. This is the camera. You can see those bellows here. These bellows were used to move this lens either front or back to get the proper focusing. And it all depended on how far the subject was standing away from the camera and how much a large group or a single person or how big the subject was. The lens moved front and back. The support of these railings, you can see these railings down here. This was the bellows that I was speaking about, the lens. The bellows was used to bring the lens either forward or backward. And these railings you see down below, these railings were used to keep the particular lens parallel to the plane of the negative behind. So the whatever was being focused in the lens was properly focused as an image on the negative behind. So here we come to the major change, the roll film. Now in the DSLR that we use is the memory card. Equivalent to this was the roll film on which the images were exposed. This is basically a roll or a strip of plastic. You see those small white openings out here? Those were there to grip the spool or in order to make the frames move in a standard and regular manner. This was coated with a chemical, silver halide, due to which it was light sensitive. So basically your roll film on which the images were exposed through the pre-digital era camera was light sensitive and could not be exposed to light before developing. Now there were many companies in this manufacturing of this kind of rolls, like for example Fujicolor, Agfa, Orvo, Kodak, Yashica, etc. Many. They had their own specialities, you can say. Like for example, I remember Kodak, when Kodak roll was known to give you the best of blues, like when you shoot a landscape and the sky is nice and bright blue. So the Kodak used to give the best results of those. Whereas Fujicolor was known to give the best of yellows in your images. So there were, in this way, many companies were involved. Here we come to ASA. This ASA, as you see here, is equivalent to our current ISO. ISO stands for International Organization of Standardization, whereas during that time, instead of international, it was America, which was way ahead. So it was American Association of Standardization. So ASA, it was equivalent to our current ISO. Currently, when we're using a DSLR, since the technology advanced so much, with every shot, if we decide to change the ISO, that is in your exif setting, we have the facility to do so. But during those days, there were rolls of fixed ISOs, that is the ASA. For example, there was a 100 ASA film, there was a 200 ASA film, there was a 400 ASA film, and so on. The 100 ASA film was a sensitive film, but more sensitive than that was the 200 ASA, and 4 times the sensitivity of 100 ASA was 400 ASA, as you can see from the figures. So what happened is, the sensitivity of the 100 ASA film was good enough to shoot pictures in daylight, outdoor daylight. It means approximately from 9:30 in the morning, that is 9:30 a.m. to around 3:34, max to max 4:30 a.m. or 4:30 p.m. in the evening. This was good enough. The moment you had inadequate light conditions like dawn and dusk, just when the sun was rising or the sun was setting, then when the light was not good enough, this roll would not capture the image properly. So a 200 ASA film was supposed to be used and had to be used, which was good for outdoor cloudy atmosphere. After that, suppose you wanted to shoot indoors. There's no outdoor light at all. There's no sunlight at all, and just the indoor light with. And those days maybe a couple of tube lights or a couple of yellow bulbs. Then the extra sensitive, that is a 400 ASA roll was used, and which was good for indoor lights. Now the fun was, as we compare to a current situation, each and every shot we can alter the ISO as and when we desire. But in those days, the difficulty was we had to pre-decide what climate or what atmosphere or what time of the day when we were going to shoot, whether it was outdoor or it was indoor. Accordingly, we had to load a film in our camera. So if you had 100 ASL film loaded in the camera, and if you wanted to shoot indoor in an inadequate light, it was not good, and the pictures would never come good enough. So once this concept is clear, we move ahead. So this is a sample camera, ideal sample camera of those days, where you have a small box-like thing, and this is the inbuilt flash. This is a slider for the flash to either keep it on or off. This is the lens opening. Now, and this is the viewfinder. If you see a small lever out here, if you push this lever towards the right, towards this white circle, then the lens would be covered, equivalent to our lens cap or lens cover. At the same time, it was connected to the viewfinder. So the viewfinder also got covered. Now, this is a very important function of this particular lever, which we'll come to later on, how this helped in shooting. This is the shutter button, and this is the overall a simple expected front of a camera. The more interesting part is the back side of the camera. Now, this trip of my experience of the pre-digital era is going to be good nostalgia for the people who have experienced it and gone through it, and I guess some learning for the people who have not experienced it and never gone through it. This is the back side of the camera. You see this space out here? The round roll, the roll film, which used to come in a encased cassette, had to be loaded out here. From here, the one tip of the roll had to be pulled out and taken away to this side of the camera, to the right side of the camera. You see this spool out here, and with the small slit out here, the one end of the roll had to be inserted into this, and it had to be tightened up with this particular winding button. This particular frame is the place where your image was supposed to get exposed, and this round circle out here is your aperture opening. The moment you click the shutter, this opened up for whatever timing was set, and this particular frame, this is a 35 mm camera, so this was exposed, and then you have to wind this button again to go to the next frame. The next blank negative used to come in front of this, and so on and so forth. Loading of the camera was very difficult in those days. It had to be precise. Experienced hands were very good at it. See this tip being loaded into that slit? It was a difficult task, and many a times even the experienced persons couldn't do it properly, and sometimes it never got loaded properly. Once that was done, the back, it had to be certain that the film was loaded properly, the back closed firmly. Usually those cameras came with replaceable batteries. This is a pencil cell battery out here. Anything going wrong in any of the steps would finally lead to a bad image or a no image at all. This orange light that you see is the indicator that the flash is currently charged and ready to be shot. This way the roll was being winded up for the next shot, and we go click. Now we come to the variety of cameras that we had at that time. SLRs and the TLR, single lens reflex and the twin lens reflex. Here you can see three cameras. This is the single lens reflex. This is of course a 35mm camera. This one again is a single lens, but it's a 16mm camera. Yes, there were smaller films also. This used to be a very handy camera, a slim and trim, slender camera with this kind of a shutter button. It's a very fancy camera and used to easily fit in someone's pocket. So it was good for family photography. Whereas this is the TLR, or the twin lens reflex camera. This particular area used to flap down or close down and open up as and when required. This was the viewing area. Here was the viewfinder, and these were the twin lens reflex camera. Now, as I said, we are living in a very easy or a very straightforward or the mechanic or the digital era where things are very simple and very easy to operate, user friendly. But those days, in the pre-digital era, there were a lot of difficulties as far as the photography was concerned. So we'll see one by one what were the difficulties. Cut film did not get locked properly into the spool slot. Just now we saw how the film was loaded, and if that cut part of the film, the starting part of the film, if it did not get locked properly into the spool, into the slot, and when we winded up the film for the next shot, actually there was no film moving ahead, and the film was all stationed in the initial slot where the film was fed in by hand. And experienced hand would realize when winding the winder that whether the film is moving or not, but a novice who was not so experienced would not realize and keep on exposing all the 36 shots that were available in a 35mm film. And only after he would give the camera to a photo lab, asking them, requesting them to remove the film and develop it for him, only after that he would realize that none of the photo was exposed and the whole film roll was a total blank. Next one. Some basic cameras had separate viewfinder not connected to the lens opening. As I showed you that sample camera, I showed you a lever where when the lever was pulled to the right, the lens cover also was coming onto the lens was getting shut. At the same time, the viewfinder also used to get shut. But some cameras previous to those days had no connected lever, which also closed the viewfinder when the lens opening was covered. So what happens is people sometimes successfully, actually is a taunting word, not successfully, click pictures without opening the lens cap. So they felt they were clicking the pictures. Of course, unless an enlightened subject who was standing in front of the camera realized, of course, if he was a photographer himself, he would warn the photographer that the lens cap is still on, please remove the lens cap. If that was not done by the subject, then the photographer would click just by looking into the viewfinder and seeing the subject through the viewfinder, but the lens cap also continuing to be on the lens without exposing the image. Shutter speed and f-stop needed to be adjusted based on the trained eye, depending upon the ASA being used. Now, shutter stop and f-stop, there were only two variables that you could change or set because ASA or the ISO was already decided when the film was loaded into the camera. Now, why this needed to be adjusted based on the trained eye? Because you had no back view like we have the current view where you can check your EXIF data, you can check whether the image is overexposed or underexposed, and then accordingly take the next shot by manipulating the EXIF data, the settings. That was not available that time. So with your previous experience, you have to judge by looking at the light whether what shutter speed and what f-stop should be appropriate for that, and then get a good shot. Next bunch of difficulties. Only after developing the roll, one would know that all the shots were either overexposed or underexposed. Sometimes nothing could be retrieved out of it. Now, this totally depended on how experienced the photographer was. If the photographer was not so experienced and not done enough of trial error before exposing a particular roll, say maybe professionally, then his mindset was inclined towards a particular setting, and only after developing the roll, and he could see the roll only after developing, he would realize that either all his settings were overexposing the images or either underexposing the images. So that difficulty was there, which could not be corrected while shooting, as we do it right now with a DSLR. Out of 36 shots in a 35 mm film, yeah, let me tell you that a 35 mm film, which was the SLR that I showed you on the top left, had 36 shots allowed in it, whereas the 120 mm film, the TLR, the twin lens reflex camera, had a 120 mm film and would allow only 24 shots. So the 30 out of 36 shots in a 35 mm film, some had to be shot and urgently developed and printed. What was happening is experts had to cut the film in a total dark background and surrounding and send that film for developing. Now, as I told you, this 35 mm film or whichever film in those days was a light sensitive film. So how today we remove off a memory card and just insert it in a slot in the computer and start looking at the images? You couldn't do that. So if a whole roll film had not been exposed and there was some urgency to develop only a part of the film and get the prints, then what had to be done is, instead of rewinding the whole film, half of the film had to be sent for processing. Now that had to be done in total darkness since it was a light sensitive film. So we had to actually wait till midnight or night till it was dark enough. Then we used to close ourselves in a totally closed room with doors locked and all lights off. Even a small streak of dim light coming from any corner of the room or from anywhere from through the door, if fallen on the film would go foggy or bad and spoil your images. So besides being in a night atmosphere and in a closed room with light shut, we used to go under a bed sheet or a black cloth or a black blanket or something to 100% ensure that the film is not getting exposed to any kind of light, and then cut the film as much that was exposed or photographed, and then the rest of the film was fed in the camera. So very cumbersome, very seriously difficult task that had to be performed in such circumstances. Next one we come to, everyone usually struggle to get 1 to 3 extra shots out of the 36 exposure film, amounting to about 37 to 38 exposures, and feeling very, very glad about it. Now in those days, film were very costly. Besides being costly, you can also compare it to once you have a 16 MB card inserted in your thing, you can go ahead and just keep on shooting without bothering much about the number of shots you're taking. Whereas those days there was a limitation of 36 shots only per roll film. So in order to be trying to get maximum out of what they have invested into money wise, so people used to try and wind the winder further ahead even after completing 36 shots to see if they could manage to get a couple of more extra shots, and that was a real boon. Some more difficulties. You see, I'm showing you the twin lens reflex camera which I've shown you earlier. These two lenses. Now the function of these two lenses was, as I told you, this was the viewing area, and this plane out here is actually the ground glass which shows you the image. Now this particular lens used to grab the image, and with the 45-degree glass out here used to portray the image on the viewing glass, whereas the actual exposing of the image on the negative behind used to happen from this particular lens. So there are two different lenses. That's why it's called the twin lens reflex. What used to happen when shooting a portrait or something, when we were really close to the subject, what used to happen is what we could see through this lens was actually on the higher side, and the lens that was grabbing the image on the negative was a little lower. So a little bit of cheating and lifting up the camera slightly higher. Once the composition was done on the viewfinder, we had to expose the film. Otherwise, what we see through this into the viewfinder was not actually shot with this lens. So that came by a little bit of trial and error method, and usually succeeded with experience. Now here we can see, since while we are there on the twin lens reflex camera, this area I'm trying to enlarge and show you. The mechanical lever, this is the lever, mechanical lever, this is the red indicator matching with the shutter speed. As you can see, the limitation out there during those days, 1, 2, 8, 15, 30, 60, 125, 1 by 30 of a second. That's it. That's the maximum shutter speed you could go to. And on the other side, there was this aperture or f-stop. This something of 3, 4, 8, 11, 18, and 22. 22 was the maximum smallest or the narrowest aperture I had to go through. I still remember with 100 ASA and daytime shots, 125 shutter speed and 22 aperture. That was a set time to give date shots. Last bit of the difficulties. Now, once you expose the image while developing the negative, you used to get either a soft, that is a less contrast negative, a normal, that is ideal negative, or hard or more contrast negative. Now, this is equivalent to the shots that we get on our memory card right now. And we have to adjust it or manipulate it in the post processing. And if the image is a little bit soft, we could increase the contrast to give it a good contrast look. If the image is very much of contrast or extra contrast, we can soften it down by reducing the contrast. But in those days, there was no computer, there was no post-production app, there was no Photoshop. So how it could be done? We couldn't print a not so good negative as it is. So that was taken care of by printing on different variety of papers. This is the orange colored paper box that used to come, the photograph paper as it was known as. They used to come in soft paper, normal paper, or hard paper. So what used to do, the soft negative used to be or had to be printed on the hard paper. So the moment the soft negative was printed on the hard paper, it used to increase the contrast and bring it more towards normal. Similarly, a hard negative had to be printed on soft paper. There was paper available as soft paper. So the extra contrast that was not so good visually used to get softened up, and the hard negative or the hard image exposed on the negative used to come towards normalcy or towards ideal negative. And of course, the normal negative used to be printed on the normal negative, so on the normal printing paper. So there were three varieties of paper also available to counter the faults or flaws in the negative: soft paper, normal paper, and hard paper. Most novices were advised to expose a whole roll to get the judgment by keeping a physical note of EXIF used for each shot and later check the results after developing the negatives. Imagine doing this. Now at the click of a button, you get your EXIF data, and you know when you shot, the date, the time, the f-stop, the shutter speed, the ISO, everything is at a click of a button now. But during the roll film days, nothing of this facility was available. So if you had to keep a track of what you're exposing, which negative, suppose you're exposing a ninth negative now, or the ninth frame now, you're exposing the 16th frame now. So you had to physically keep a note of EXIF data, or what shutter speed and what f-stop you used for that particular frame. And when the roll was developed and the print was obtained, cross-check and see whether what EXIF you had set was whether right or not so right, and what corrections had to be done. So this was a trial and error method that had to be used by photographers who started photography newly. So based on which he could take decision of setting while shooting later. So this experience helped him to get maximum good results for each and every shot later when he continued with his photography. We saw the 400 ASF film, which was used for indoor photography, but still sometimes there used to be inadequate light, and the subject had to be lightened up a bit more beyond the capacity of the 400 ASF film. So a flash was used. We all know the flash that we use today, but in those days, this is that aluminum dome that or a concave cup-like thing, which was the reflector, and in that there was a bulb, a flash bulb. In those days, in the very early days, each bulb used to cost 6 rupees. Why I'm saying each bulb? Because the moment you clicked a flash photograph, the bulb used to get fused or short circuited and emit bright light, which used to get reflected from this reflector, and the shot was exposed. But then the bulb was of no use because it had got fused. So we had to change the bulb and replace with a new bulb if the next shot was to be taken with a flash. So it was very costly around those days. This was around the 70s and the 80s. And imagine the number of photographs taken with this method. Very hardly, very few, because it was becoming a very costly affair. Negatives were of different sizes, 16 mm, 35 mm, 120 mm. These three are the same ones, connecting to the camera that I showed you. The slim, slender camera was the 16 mm camera. The Nikon was the 35 mm camera. And on the right side, TLR, the twin lens reflex, was the 120 mm camera. This was supposed to be the medium format, a good big format, where this used to allow to give you a good large size of prints. So this is also equivalent to the megapixel that you have in your camera, which allows you to either get a good print, a good enlarged print without any noise. So if you compare 12 megapixel, 16 megapixel, 24 megapixel, somewhere that sort. So 16 negative used to give a good 4 by 6 inches of good print. Beyond that, there used to be a lot of noise and grains on it. 35 negative was the one that was used maximum by many of the photographers. It used to give a good big enlargement, say about 8 by 10 inches also. And 120 mm, you could go beyond 12 by 15 or 12 by 16 and all that. So this was especially used for functions like weddings, etc. Now, those negatives were the only thing that we have. The way we protect our images and do a double backup in your external hard disk and all. So the negatives were the only source to reprint those pictures. So there were protection covers of plastic so that they don't get into touch with moisture and get spoiled. So different size, different protection covers were there. Now, the photo lab, which people who used to uh, give those protection booklets of to keep the negatives, maintain your negatives, had some instructions printed behind on the booklet itself. So these were very important, especially for beginners. Some don'ts. Don't load your film before checking and cleaning your camera in the lens and the lens. Now this was because the lens, the roll that we used to load into the camera was a light sensitive roll. Once the roll was loaded into the camera, you couldn't open the camera in between and check for any kind of technical problems with the camera. So the loading of your film had to be done only after cross-checking with the camera. Don't expose at B or T without a tripod or camera rest. This is basically B is your bulb mode or T is your timer mode, where you do things for long exposure. And thus definitely this was advised to do it with a tripod or a camera rest, because there would be an obvious handshake. Don't allow the light or sun to shine directly into the camera lens to protect the camera lens. Of course, we do that right now also. Don't forget to change the number of your film after each exposure is made. Now, this is a very funny instruction. As I've shown you, after each and every click, after you press the shutter and the images captured onto the negative, you have to wind the negative to the next blank negative, which would come in front of the aperture opening. If that was not done, what used to happen is it used to double expose the image. And if that was not done intentionally, what used to happen after developing the role, the photographer used to see that a ghost-like image is there overlapping his original image, and used to wonder how that happened, spoiling both the images in the process. Next one is don't try to see or expose film before it's developed in darkroom, because people in those days also very anxious to see the results, and that's why, since the roll film is light sensitive, they were advised not to try and see your pictures. Don't load or unload your camera in the direct sun, again because it was light sensitive. So the caution was, you may spoil your picture if you forget the above don'ts. Now, after shooting, we come to the developing of a film. Developing a roll film has to be done in total darkness. As we said earlier, that the roll film is very light sensitive. So to develop the film and to get the pictures that we have clicked when we're shooting it through the camera, the roll film developing had to be done in total pitch darkness. The film in the camera had to be removed from the camera in total darkness. There was an option if the photographer had itself has rewinded the film and placed it in a dark plastic cylindrical box and handed over to the photo lab guy, it was okay. Otherwise, there were novices who used to hand the camera over to the photo lab person and ask him to take the roll out of the camera, which was again had to be done in total darkness. So there are 4 tray used in the process of developing a film. The first tray you see has the developer in it. Developer is basically a chemical which used to usually be combined with water 50-50, like one portion of water and one portion of developer. Second used to be a stop bath. Third used to be a fixer with hypo, and fourth was water. Now, once the negative was got for developing, whatever was exposed on the negative, that chemical had to be developed. The film had to be developed so that it showed on it what was shot on the film. Once the developer was developed, it had to go into the stop bath. There was a particular timing, say about 5 minutes, 6 minutes to 7 minutes, depending on the ASA and the make of the film, how long it had to be developed to get the correct image on the negative. Once that procedure was done without going overboard, it had to go to the stop bath where the procedure of developing the film was stopped. And then it had to go to the third tray, which was called the fixer. This fixer fixed the negative or fixed the chemical that was exposed on this negative, and no further developing used to happen. Now, all these three chemicals were highly toxic and used to stink anything like anything. So all these traces of chemicals on the negatives had to be totally removed off before the negative could be used to make a print. So the final and last tray, the fourth tray, used to be of water where the negatives were developed. Now, if you remember those people who are there in the attending this webinar and remembering those days, people used to say, "Roll हमने धोने के लिए दिया है." So basically, because of water fourth tray, that term was used, and now you know why it was used. Method in the darkroom. Now, this was a very difficult part. The role developing in the darkroom. Now, I have made this film in proper light so that you could see what is actually happening in the darkroom. This tray is filled with developer, and later on it will be filled with second, third, fourth tray in by stop bath and fixer and water, etc. But this what had to be done inside the tray. This is a roll film which I've made with black paper, tinted paper, for you to get the feel of what was actually done. The roll was dipped into the liquid, whatever liquid it was, whether it was developer or stop bath or fixer or water, and it had to be rolled from one side to the other so that each and every part of it was immersed properly into that particular liquid. This was a very difficult task, especially you imagine doing all this in total darkness, pitch dark. Any streak of light would spoil the negative, would spoil the images. So the dark room was usually a very small room, sealed with all corners and all areas sealed properly, so that no streak of light came in even by mistake. And I remember those days, you can't even have a particular timer or something in the dark room. So if it was a 5 to 6 minutes developing time, I remember we used to actually sing a couple of 3-minute songs, and that way we used to measure the timing. So that was not the book style, but those were the fun time that we used to enjoy in the dark room. After developing the negative, we come to storing of the negative, which I've already shown that there were plastic envelopes, plastic covers in which you used to store the negative, but that was the bulk lot. Now, some specially marked negatives had to be stored in individual envelopes. Imagine or compare it to the way we do now. We have a folder on our laptop or on the desktop where we have the whole images of a particular safari loaded. But then there are some pictures that we like and we need to either share it on the Facebook, or we either need to make a print for competitions or something like that, some special. So it was very difficult to maintain a record of these kind of stuff or these kind of negatives that time. So instead of keeping them in the whole lot of strips of all the rest of the negatives, we had to individually store it like this. This is the way I remember I stored my negatives, each negative in a separate envelope, small envelope, with a sketchy drawing of what was actually there as a picture in the negative. This is a person playing a flute, and this is a skull. Yes, it's a bit frightening. It's a picture of a skull, but that was important, and we photographers always try to shoot something that is out of the way. So these specially marked negatives. This is the negative of that flute playing person. This is the negative of that skull, and then converted to prints or bromide. Now this was done digitally. There was no actual prints made. So this you can do either in Photoshop or your Snapseed or something. Apps on the mobile also has those kind of things. This I remember. This was a real interesting shot that we took during those days when I was learning photography way back in 1981, if I am right. And there was a particular training school of photography in town side, South Mumbai side, in Dhobi Talao near Metro Cinema, called as Photokala Mandir. And one of our outings had been to Basin Fort, what we now call it Vasai Fort, and this was a shot that we got there at the seashore. Yeah, coming back to that same thing that I mentioned, that physically you had to keep a track of each and every shot that you took, especially if it was something interesting or out of the box shot. So this particular shot that you can see is of a highway. The exposure was a long exposure, 35 seconds, and 5.6 was the f-stop. And I had kept details of this exhibit data, especially on in my diary. And then when this negative came in, I inserted it in a special envelope and noted this. Otherwise, it was very difficult to remember. So this is the negative that I got out of it, and this is the print. I remember this shot taken from a terrace of a building. You can see those cars or vehicles moving, leaving those light trails behind. These are the street lights, and this was the way the long exposure had to be shot and kept record of. Yeah, this is some very important certificate that I remember. 2nd May to 15th June 1981. This was a photo Kala which I just mentioned. A lot of BNHS people also used to come and learn there, and I did my first course of photography during those days in 1981. Okay, once you've developed the film, we need to order reprints to a photo lab. So this was the envelope that was provided by them, and you can see the options that they had to mark so that they knew what was to be done about this particular order. It was either development and printing. If you are giving the role for the first time for developing, it's developing only. Sometimes people used to develop only, and then later on, seeing the results, they used to decide what was to be printed. So reprints, and they used to have the option of either you can do a glossy print or a matte print, and then accordingly, this is the area I've enlarged to show you the number of negatives on there was number of on the negatives 1 to 36, and if you got some extra couple, so second, third, fourth, and sixth negative, one print each of 4 by 6 inches. That was the way we had to order it to the photo lab. Once the roll had gone for printing, again the printing, just like the developing, had to be done in a dark room. One factor of relief was the developing of a negative had to be done in total pitch darkness, whereas the printing could be done in the presence of red light, because the printing paper was not as sensitive as the negative. It was a bit less sensitive, and it never got affected with the red light. So that was a little bit of a saving grace. And this is the plan for a dark room where printing is done. So this is the enlarger through which the photographs were printed on a photography paper. Once they were printed, same routine like the negative. They used to go into a developer, then go to the stop bath, then go to the fixer to fix that particular image, and then go to the water to wash off all the chemicals, and then go to the cutting board to get cut in the proper size. This enlarger, the printing was done through enlarger. This was the most important gadget in those days through which you could print the negatives. Now this is the enlarger, and you can see the detailed part of it. This particular area is where the negative used to be kept. These are the bellows with which the image was focused and fine-tuned on this baseboard. This was the lens through which it was focused, and this particular filter used to be a red filter. The printing procedure. As I told you, this is the red light which was allowed in the darkroom, and when the image was portrayed on the base, it was shown like this. But with the red light, with the red filter on, the image was portrayed like this. So with the red filter on, the paper was to be kept below, and then the print was again developed in the same way, 4 steps. Because of the presence of red light, what was possible was is to see how good the developing of the print has happened. And the moment you felt that the developing of the print has happened properly up to the mark, and it should not be overdeveloped, then immediately you could cross-check that, ascertain the stage at which the print was developed, and then put it in the stop bar to stop the processing. Okay. Now, once the printing is done, we come to a section where I'm going to show you prints from old negatives, how it can be done in a today's setup. Now, this is like your homework in your lockdown. Many of you must be having a lot of negatives, old negatives stacked up, and you don't know what to do, how to go about it. So this is the simple setup that I've made at my place, at my home, which you can also do. This is the plain white light in the background. In front of it is a white paper which I've hanged from a shelf. This either could be a plain white paper or a white acrylic sheet or something, and I've pasted or taped the negatives onto it. This is how it looks from the front. These are the negatives. I have 2 negatives I've taken as a sample. This is the negative. This is the print of it. This is a digital print, of course. This is not a hard copy print. This is how you could do it through a cell phone also, a negative and the print image of it. In those days, the mounting methods were different. Print was there, mounted on a mount board with ready-made framings printed on it. And of course, some very famous photographers, photo labs, or photo studios were well known all over the city, especially in Mumbai. So this particular photograph was clicked and framed at Prakash Kala Mandir, which is very famous in Dadar. Just an example to show you. Now we come to bridging the gap from the pre-digital era. How we slowly stepped into the digital era is when the role was given for developing, the photo lab starting giving us negatives as well as transforming those images from the negatives in a digital mode and giving it in a form of a CD. This is the time when we started getting the images in a digital form, and then we could order the same through the CD also. Usually what was done is a test print or thumbnails, what we can call it, or what was actually called as a contact sheet. This was the contact sheet of the whole roll film. And then we could see the numbers, we could see the images and decide which were the best photograph, which were the best pictures, and then accordingly order those particular prints only. So finally the prints were printed and came into our hands, and we stored them in these kind of albums. We have ample of albums right now at our place, and sometimes really fun going back to those years, browsing to through those albums. So friends, we are done with the webinar. Now for the questions, I would request you to not ask any questions on the chat. Instead, there's a question and answer tab on the top. So you go to that tab of question and answers, and I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. There could be that due to lack of time or for whatever reason, some questions may remain unanswered, or we may, or you may think of some questions later on. So these are my details, the WhatsApp number, the Instagram lead, the email ID, all these things you can take note of and get in touch with me for any queries later on also. Before going to the questions, I would like to inform you, my session of pre-digital era photography was the 5th in a row by DCP Expeditions. And the next one scheduled is product photography by Vidyadhar Pawar. He is a great expert and you already know him through the social media. So please stay tuned and keep in touch with the various DCP forums as in Instagram or Facebook and your events updates, WhatsApp groups, and keep in touch. So we now go to the questions. Sonika Agarwal, how can we try film photography in 2020? That's a very good question. Many photographers still have those cameras, but I guess very few places where you could get hold of a roll film. But I'm sure there are some places, especially maybe in Fort or in Dadar or somewhere, or even in town side, South Bombay side, somewhere there are some studios, some photography outlets who do supply roll films, and you should definitely try. It's very challenging at the time. At the same time, because it's challenging, it's very content giving. Also, it gives you a satisfaction. Sonika, how can negatives be converted into digital photos? I think you asked this question even before I could show you the setup that I made at my home. So you can see that setup with a white background, light behind, and a white paper on top of it or in front of it, and then your negatives taped on it. Shoot it with your camera. Try to mount your camera on a tripod so that you get a very sharp picture, and then the needful can be done either through Photoshop or through your cell phone. Sonika, again, I have a camera, but the film roll and photo lab are available nowadays. Now, this is something even Sonika, even I have not tried, because it's so easy to do photography nowadays with a DSLR. But yes, some people who are still interested, and some people must be definitely doing roll film photography. So I think Google is the best answer, and you would get to know about it through that. Hi Venki Krishnan here. Could you explain the slide where you showed how to protect the negative on the wall? Could you explain the slide where you showed how to protect the negative on the wall? Negative on the wall. Protect the negative on the wall. Sorry Venki, I'm not exactly able to get to know this question of yours. Explain the slide where you showed how to protect the negative on the wall. No, that's not protection of the negative on the wall. I was trying to shoot the negative with my camera so that I could convert it to a print or a bromide, digital bromide, through the image that I would get with my camera. Hello Minaji, how are you? Meena Chavan asking, what to do with old negatives? How can we preserve them? Minaji, as I said, old negatives, the best way to preserve them is keep them away from dampness, from moisture, from humidity, because if they're in a plastic cover and if there's moisture, then they get stuck to the plastic, and then that peels off a part of the negative, and then that negative is totally spoiled. So basically keep it away from dampness and moisture and humidity. And I know you're staying right next to the seashore, the most dangerous area for such a thing. So I don't know, I've not tried it, but you have these boxes, for preserving your cameras, your lenses. You can keep your negatives along with that. Mrinal Ghosh is asking, is film photography still possible even today? I think I've answered the same question asked by Sonika. So yes, it is still possible today. Why not? The technology is still there. The only thing is the scarcity of the whole films that would be available today, and the kind of camera which is in a working condition or not even today has to be seen. And definitely, if you have the desire, you should go in for it and give it a try. Desh Bhushan Jainji, Namaskar. I have some telephoto zoom lenses of film era. Can these lenses be used on the present day digital camera? Dev Bhushanji, I don't think they are compatible at all, because the total technology has been changed, and the present day digital camera has those connection points which will be missing in those zoom lenses of the film era, because the technology was not meant for that kind. So I don't think that would be possible. Venki Krishnan asking, based on your experience, which one gives the best image, film or digital? I would say film gives the best experience, gives best image, because however big or high the megapixel is, still it is made of pixels, whereas film is a continuous solution. It's a continuous chemical with no division into pixels. So it's a more of a continuous image that you get without being pixelated. Of course, it has its own limitations, and only if what I've heard is, some cameras with 100 megapixel and all that, if they can compete with the film, that's it. Otherwise, film is the best. I remember doing some life-size enlargements with a film negative, the 120 and they used to be very nice. Sonika Agarwal, can we do it in a lab? Do what? The developing? Yes, it can be done. You're not specified properly what can we do in a lab. So, Sonika, very difficult to answer this question. Hi Ramdas, how are you? Ramdas Bhatt is asking why there were 36 exposures, not more or less. Now that's a very difficult question. It's like you asking why so many in a 8 MB memory card, or why only so many exposures in a 128 MB card. It's like that was practically possible because the physically the roll had to be wounded up in that particular space. So if you got more of film, then you needed a bigger space, and the camera would go bulky and not handy enough to carry and all that. And so that was the answer for why 36 exposure. Of course, less could have been possible, but it had to be economically feasible also. Hi, Furkan Ahmed. Did you face any problems during those days, like film not moving, too much exposure, or lens cap shut? I remember not exactly what you're trying to say, but there was an incident where I remember that the film did not move after half of it, whatever the reason was, and then half of my film had totally come out blank after exposing. It was totally overexposed because the film never got exposed to through the opening of the aperture. Venki Krishnan here. I meant the slide where you did some setup at home was referring to that. Yeah, I think I've answered that. That was not how to protect the negative. It was how to make an image of your negative through your DSLR and then use that to make a print, digital print. Manu Srivastava with the questionnaire. Hi Manu. Was film reversal roll developed in the same way or was it different? Was film reversal roll developed in the same way or was it different? Manu, are you asking about transparencies? Because transparency, as I know, was used to get directly the transparent could be projected on a wall as in like a film, as in like a positive image. So yeah, they were developing the same because the only the chemical base changed in it. Otherwise, the process was the same. Venki Krishnan again with another question. Can you explain the difference between hotshot film camera and the other film camera during those days? Yes. Hotshot film camera and the other film camera during those days, the difference was just like your point and shoot cameras now and the DSLR camera, the kind of adjustment, the kind of setting, the facilities and the variety of setting that would go through with the DSLR now and the point and shoot, the limitation it has. Similarly, the hotshot film camera and the other film camera during those days, that was the difference. With the film cameras, like the 120mm camera, I showed you the variety of shutter speed that you would adjust and keep. With the hotshot camera, it had a fixed shutter speed, a fixed aperture, and then you just saw through the viewfinder and shot, and that's what you got. Hi Mridal, how are you? Mridal Ghosh asking, could color enhancement or saturation be done in a film photography? Could color enhancement or saturation be done in a film photography? Now, what I was showing you continuously was a black and white film in the black and white era. Anything to do with color was done mechanically, and during those days when the color films came in, it was a real secret, like a thing that was not many people knew about it. And what I could relate it to is what I've actually done. Could color enhancement or saturation be done in the film photography? And the black and white film, yes. That process was done in the dark room while you were printing the image with the enlarger, and suppose a particular part of the film was not exposed properly. So either dodging or burning could be done, and that way you could manipulate a little bit while printing. Manu Srivastav. Film reversal for slides. That's what I was saying. Slides, or those are called as transparencies. Manu, slides and transparencies are the same. Transparencies were used for projection directly through a projector. So the procedure was the same for developing them. How was video captured in previous days? Now, the video captured in previous days was also on film, and not much of videography done domestically, as in weddings and all. That was, even a particular wedding could afford a still photographer was good enough. Videography or cinematography was done in films those days, and actual roll films was used. So it was a very, very costly affair. Like whoever of you know, there used to be various takes and shots in the film, and the NG, the not good shots, were discarded off, and the shot that was okay was finally taken up for editing for a movie or for a film. So it is very easy now, and less financially taxing when we are gone digital. But in those days, rolls and rolls of films had to be used, and through a videographer or through a cinematographer, and a lot of wastage used to be there. And it was a very costly affair. There's Bhushan Jayanti again. Thanks for a beautiful and very informative in the representation. Sir, I guess we are from the same era. You also enjoyed all that. So I hope you had some nostalgic moments, and thanks for the appreciation. Dhananjay Borse. Hi, Dhananjay. Uh, Dhananjay is asking, can we take 4 to 5 photos on the film, take it in the dark room and cut the roll and use the balance roll again? Yes, very much. I explained that in one of my points, that whatever amount of film you had exposed, you had to go into a dark room or make a dark room like appearance, and open up the back of the camera, and whatever exposed rolls had gone to the right hand side of the camera, you, just for safety sake, you wind up a couple of more part of the negative, cut it off that at that point, and transfer it while it is in dark to a dark black plastic cylindrical box, which was meant for transferring the film to the photo lab. And then the remaining film that was there in your camera could be easily inserted into the slot and used later for further shooting. Ramdas Bhatt. Hi Ramdas, how are you in this lockdown? Were features such as exposure compensation, white balance, were there in the film era? You mean to say, as compared to your bracketing and while shooting? No. While shooting, all that we had was the ASA had to be decided, that is the ISO of the film had to be decided, which was being used, which could be 100 ASA, 400 ASA, 200 ASA, or whatever. I have heard of some films going up to 800 ASA, super sensitive films. But exposure compensation and white balance were there in the film. No, whatever had to be done, I told you, could be manipulated by either printing the results of the negative either on a soft paper or hard paper or normal paper, or as I answered the previous question, whatever little bit of manipulations or could be done by dodging or burning while printing it from the enlarger. There's Bhushanji again. Kindly upload this presentation on YouTube. Yes, sir. Thanks to DCP Expeditions LLP, we are all these free webinars we are uploading on the YouTube in approximately after a week's time. So definitely go back and have a review of this. Manish Jain. Kodak was the market leader then. Yes, Manish, Kodak was a market leader then, and I remember photography is equal to Kodak. That was the equation that time, and but of course they couldn't keep pace, as what is said, and I remember Kodak came to such a low that the building in Fort, I don't know whether this news is right or wrong, but it was in the gossip that time, the whole building in Fort opposite Handloom House was sold out for 90 crores when they couldn't keep pace with the market. Yogesh Matre. Hi Yogesh, how are you? Thanks for the nice nostalgic session. Yeah, I guess I don't know what age bracket you come into, but if you have never experienced this roll film shooting and developing and printing, do try and give it a hand. Vidyadhar Pawar, it's a very informative presentation. Thanks a lot, Vidyadhar. I'm going to enjoy your session next weekend. Thanks for it. We are coming to end of our time frame. Last 1 minute remaining, and then we'll have to close down. Any other questions, you can go ahead and ask me through the details that I've given you down below with my WhatsApp number, etc. Furkan Ahmed, what were the different focal lengths in which were available then? Furkan Ahmed, very limited limited variety available then. Usually, in fact, I don't even remember. I'm nearly, what you can say, about 45 years beyond that now. I started when I was around 16, 17 years of age, and was too much of a novice to note all that down. But then, not much of variety. The way we have speak now of 2.8 and 1.2 and 5.6 and all that. Not much of those variety were available then. Whatever limited we had, we used to shoot with that. Thank you. Back to childhood days. Oh, thanks, Sonika. You're most welcome. Ranjay Borse. It used to be called like Kodak moment. Yes. Now what we say is a Kodak moment. That time it was called as a Kodak moment. As I told you, Kodak was equivalent to photography. That was the equation that Kodak had made in the market. Vimal Dedia. Thank you so much, sir. You're most welcome, Vimal. Thank you, Dhananjay. Thanks a lot. That's great. Thanks a lot to all of you. And we can end the session here now. Thank you very much.